So welcome everybody. Thanks so much for joining today from the multiple countries that you're joining us from, the towns and cities around Australia. I'd certainly like to start by welcoming everyone and acknowledging that we're meeting today virtually, but we're all located on lands, traditional owners that I'm acknowledging their elders past, present and emerging. So I'm coming from Perth today, so it's the Whadjuk Nation, the Noongar people here, and I certainly do pay my respects to them. So thank you all for joining today. Wow, what a turnout. Who knew that tendering and things that you might do before we actually tender would be so interesting? So, and the reality is, I guess everybody recognises the reality is that most businesses, whether we like it or not, we are reliant on bidding. We're reliant on contestable sorts of processes to guide how we win and retain work. So today is going to be we're a pretty big group, okay? So from a just a logistics perspective, I'm going to give us a couple of opportunities to share. But so your principal mechanism to engage today will be through the Zoom chat function, and I'm trusting everybody's well and truly used to using chat now. So please feel free to drop comments into the chat. We will have the opportunity to share those and reflect on them as we go. There's a couple of sections, I guess, specifically set up today so that if an opportunity, I guess, just to interact. We've got a bit to cover, so I'll get us off and running right now. I'm trusting through a thumbs up if everyone can see the screen that I'm sharing at the moment. So maybe you can just sort of go and have okay virtual. I was going the virtual route, but a physical thumbs up for those with camera on is also fine by me. So that's great. Thanks very much. All right, here we go. So I don't think it's a surprise to anybody to thank you, Adam, for the thumbs up. It's a surprise that times are a bit uncertain. All right. In fact, we reflect in our business that it hasn't felt like this for a while. Actually, this sort of, like we're calling it choppiness, and if you sort of kind of try to dial into it, it started with perhaps some sort of the geopolitical landscape that we're confronting. You know, COVID hasn't really gone away, but it's certainly still sort of in the background. So we have this sort of geopolitical context in Europe, and then we've got the version of it that a bit closer to home that's maturing, including announcements today that are quite relevant related to it around AUKUS. So we've got this sort of this undercurrent, right, of sort of this sort of broader geopolitical uncertainty. Then we sort of add to that, we kind of go, well, what about interest rates? Again, depending on who you talk to or who you listen to, they're stabilising, they're still going up, or they might in fact start going down. So we're sort of hunting for direction, and it's a little hard to find. And then I take a view on affordable housing and the housing crisis, and those of us with young adult kids and teenagers and like trying to get into the market, it's tricky. Then we sort of toss inflation into the mix, and the federal government, you know, the Reserve Bank's fervent desire to get us back to its 2 to 3% range in Australia, and what that's doing in terms of confidence, in terms of people's ability to make investment decisions and to spend. So there's just sort of this sort of broad context, right? So my job's to point out that there is some silver lining in all of this, right? So it's not necessarily all doom and gloom, of course, but there is an area that I'm not sure that work winning organisations that sell goods and services get, but there's also some changes going on over in the world of procurement. So over in the environment of our clients, our customers, and so you may have dialed into some of this, you may not, but you might be interested to understand that interactive sourcing, so is certainly accelerating in its uptake around commercial and government buying. So, and what I mean by that is it's more than just the typical, hey, we put a submission in and then somewhere later on we might get invited to a presentation or something. We're seeing now interactivity inside of the sort of typical tender open period, evaluated interaction. And we're also seeing competitive versions of that through the use of technology like Agile, so a process that's been around in the ICT sector for some time. So imagine that if you haven't experienced it already, you could be in a room of your competitors being asked questions and you're being assessed as part of that process. How do you behave? What do you do? We're seeing some of these changes, right, around how buying organisations are adapting to this uncertainty and trying to drive speed into their procurements. What's also interesting, you may have seen, is that data analytics is being rapidly taken up. In fact, there's some interesting studies around the extent to which organisations are spending to get better data, and our ability as buyers and sellers into these clients to be able to help the richness of data and rapid decision making as a result of it is really starting to be noticeable, as is, and dare I say it, wider uptake of e-procurements. Now, I know we all love a good portal, right? Who doesn't? But the reality is that they're here to stay, and in fact we'll see more and more uptake of these sorts of technologies, and yeah, with all their attending speed advantages, but quite frankly, they're attending disadvantages in terms of our ability to differentiate, right? So, but it's here to stay, and it's certainly accelerating. And there's one more that you might find interesting, and perhaps no surprise at all, but there's a gear shift going on in our market around ESG and the uptake, and the move from greenwashing has disappeared, right? It's all now green working. You've seen announcements now. ASIC are actually finding organisations who are greenwashing their credentials in their public statements. It's not now just, I'd like to think about having a go at helping, drive up Aboriginal and Indigenous engagement or something. It's actually, what are you doing about it? Where's your reconciliation action plan? Show us that you're on this journey. So you've got this sort of broader economic, it's macroeconomic climate, right? That sort of adds a bit of uncertainty. We're looking for some direction in some of our markets. We've certainly got some underpinning economic fundamentals that makes it all feel a bit awkward. And we've got this sort of context over on the other side of the ledger, which is the people that we're trying to actually sell our goods and services to, are also adapting and changing. So that's our world, right? So we sell, we buy and sell, we sell services, we sell our goods into this, right? So I guess my point is, today's certainty really is uncertainty. We know now that what's normal is change and adaptability and flexibility. That's the reality of the work winning and retaining environment we're now in. I'm presuming that resonates with everybody. I'm sort of just setting the scene a little bit. Feel free to just use the chat if you want to. That's okay. Otherwise, I'll just press on, because it's not all bad, right? Because yes, that's all changing, but what isn't changing, right? So if you take a view about what's not changing, and the reality is that customers, so your clients, your prospects, they still are forming opinions about the marketplace before procurement events, be they interactive ones, be they portal ones, or whatever the case may be. It is still utterly true that the organisations that are acquiring your goods and services are forming opinions about the marketplace. And they're also fallible beings, just like the rest of us, right? They have needs, issues and concerns, pressures and priorities like everybody else. And so they also need information from you to help them make up their minds about who they're going to pick. So despite all that other sort of uncertainty, these things have always stayed the same. They're just the character perhaps in which it happens changes. So the punchline is they still can be persuaded. So there's absolutely no, and look, and if you didn't think that as business owners, leaders in your organisations, selling, inside of contestable processes, you wouldn't do it. And so we all recognise that that there still is an opportunity to get in front of these of business opportunities. There still is an opportunity to position our organisations to be preferred, and so that's great. All right, so that sets the context for the rest of this web event today. So any thoughts on that? Who just popped something in the chat? Does anyone disagree? Does anyone? I'm just curious. I mean, you're allowed to be flagrant. That's all right. But of course, people are people, and people are selling to people. So, okay, I'm seeing a shy lot, BidWrite team. So we'll press on. We've got an opportunity to interact in just a minute. So your chance to sort of let the fingers do the talking will happen very shortly. All right. So okay, good. So people can be persuaded. So let's jump into some of our favourite stuff. So what makes a good tender or proposal or quote submission? So what's good about it? And so generally when I ask people this question, the question will be, well, it's got to look good and read well, right? So it's got to make sense when somebody's looking at it, and that applies to whichever format that the submission takes. It has to be compliant, okay, right? So this idea of compliance, we've got to answer the questions. It's got to tick the boxes. It's got to be a good price. In fact, I don't think any of us would disagree, right? That these days, more than ever, if your price isn't anywhere near the mark, then you're probably not going to win anyway. Let's be honest. So price has got to be okay. It's also has to make sense. So the solution, the actual what you're offering has got to make sense. So from our perspective, that's what you generally see in a submission. Does anyone violently disagree with me? There are other things, of course, but by and large, a submission that looks looks okay, reads well, and price is all right, answers the questions properly, and kind of makes sense is generally what you'd say is a good tender. Not necessarily an excellent one, but a good one. And so if you're sort of spotting the analogy here, if you actually go, well, what really makes a good tender? So if you see what goes into, where's the inertia, where's the mass that drives what you see? And in our experience, it falls into a couple of categories. It's this idea of having a really good planning and structure and framework around how your work winning works. So you've got good collateral and reuse material. We've got good processes that guide how it all works. We use the art and science of persuasion to make what appears to be nice and easy to read and nice and impactful actually comes from a lot of substantive scientific evidence about how to do that. I mean, reality is a lot of people think that these days grab a Grammarly app to grammatically correct what you've written, perhaps use Chat GPT to write it for you, and job's done, right? But the reality is that there's a lot of work that goes into what ultimately you see. There's certainly the idea of capture and bid strategy. So this idea of how are you going to win? Why are you better and different to your competitors? So this idea of a thorough understanding of the client and your own capability and your competitors. So you put all that mixed together. And when we talk capture, in case the language is not familiar to you, it's essentially the positioning activity, the strategy work you're doing ahead of the tender to make your organisation better positioned to win. So these things, and I don't expect anyone's going to disagree with me, that these things here generally all have to happen before an RFT hits, before we're in the live open period. Yes, you can do some of it inside of a tender open period, there's no question. And sometimes we unnecessarily have to, right? But by and large, the work winning mass happens upstream, and I think you'll get it, which is why you're here. I think the other observation I'd make is the time and the day of treating the tendering part of the sales process as the administrative back end is gone. It's if you didn't need any reasons beforehand, that the environment that we're now trying to pitch into makes it compelling. It's an absolutely strategic business function. It's not the colouring in department at the end of an estimating process. They're all, the imports are important, of course, but this idea of what we're trying to do to win work these days being something other than a strategic business function is really a poor reflection in our view of what's happening. So that's our sort of environment. Okay, so we all get that there's all these things that sort of happen upstream, that will need to happen upstream of a tender inside of an environment that we're finding ourselves in. So let me just turn the keys to the meeting to you for a minute. So I really would like just a few folks just to pop something into the chat. So everyone knows starting tendering earlier is better, right? It's a bit like the early bird catches the worm and all of that. We all understand it. Why don't we? What's the reason why, if you know you should do it, you don't? I'd be interested in just some general views on it. I've got my own, and I'm happy to share them. But I'm watching the chat with avid interest just to see what you think. Resource constraints, thank you. Yep, time constraints. Having a date, brilliant, right? Time, other demands. See, it's so frustrating, isn't it? Because too many tenders on the go, right? I'd love to get onto that one, but I've got 4 others that I'm trying to actually get on with at the same time. I love it. This idea that tendering is another thing you do is utterly prevalent in our experience. There's just so many organisations and individuals who just battle through this, and it's, in our view, because it's seen as administrative. And it's also seen a bit like a lottery. So if I do enough of them, one will stick, right? So that justifies the effort that I put into it. And it's a really interesting frame to think through tendering if you look at it like that, right? Because it isn't really a lottery. In fact, and here's another thing that's just an observation I'd make too, and I'd love to hear your views on this, is you don't always have to win by having a good tender, right? You just have to have one that's not as bad as everybody else's. So this whole principle of it's sort of relative, I think also works sometimes to our disadvantage, because you can win by not putting much work into a tender if all the moons line up. But it's not happening because it was strategically planned. It's happening because it was just circumstances of the time. And I'm really interested in and it's perhaps not the conversation for today, but about how organisations try to actually drive in a bit more strategy and a bit more thinking into particularly key pursuits, key bids, to make sure that they aren't sort of then being compromised by all of the other things that we do. Some great chat. I'm just I'm seeing a few interesting observations around, I guess, some structural questions in organisations about how bid teams behave or are allowed to behave. This sort of idea. Stephen made a point at the end of the chat there around a reluctance to engage with the probity-conscious customers is really a great one, right? And I'm a former procurement person, and I look back at my years as procurement with utter horror at how miserable I was at allowing the market to try to talk to me and understand what our needs and issues are. So I completely accept that the other side of the deal's got a lot to answer for as well. But what we are seeing though is we're seeing that unpicking a little bit, as I mentioned earlier, because of the growth of interactivity up into procurement. and the probity frames are having to adapt to that. And so I think we'll see perhaps well overdue, but a welcome and refreshing opportunity to have some of the engagement upstream of the sort of the typical probity type of process that we're used to. So look, thanks very much, everyone. There's some great observations there in your team about why we don't do these things earlier. And so what I've got next is, I guess, some ideas about well, what can you do about it? And BidWrite's produced a few years ago a thing called 10 Steps to Bid Readiness. I'm not going to go through all of those of course today, because I'm just going to pick three. But it is worth noting that there are a lot of things organisations can do to get ready for bidding and being successful, and not all of them need to be transformational in the context of how organisations set themselves up to do tendering. Some of them are actually quite straightforward and easy. Maybe you're doing them already, and so there's a quick example, and I can jump back to there if you like. But what I want to do is talk about three of them in particular that we want to showcase today, and they are. Oops, there we are. The idea of some sort of readiness or some sort of assessment of where you're actually at tendering. The concept of bid strategy development, or if it's early enough, capture strategy development, and then this really important principle around aligning stakeholders. And from the chat people have just sort of shared with us, then seems to be a fair bit of needing people in your organisations to get on the same page about this stuff. And so they're the three things I'd like to talk about today, and the reason why you've joined. And let me just spend a few minutes now on each one of those. The idea of the readiness review, and I've loved the alliterative R's here, so apologies in advance if it's not your cup of tea. But do your organisations take stock every now and then of where you're at with your bidding? Have you got any idea about whether it's good or it isn't, whether it's current or it's not? And I'd love to think that most organisations do, but I know the answer is they don't, right? Because of all the reasons that you've just shared with us. There's this churn, there's this sort of just this machine that kind of keeps grinding away, and you win enough of them to not necessarily see that there's a reason to do something different. So there's a couple of examples just to share with you, and perhaps a couple of checks for you to take away after the web event today. So when I talk about recency, what I mean is, in particular, the sort of the how recent and up to date is your collateral, how your proof collateral and the like. And so, generally speaking, we talk about five years as a. Sorry, I'm a left-handed writer, and I'm apologising in advance. But the idea of if your stuff is more than about 5 years old, then it's probably not relevant anymore, right? So it's probably not new enough. In some markets, especially where there's technology transforming things very quickly, it might be 2 or 3 years. So if you're reflecting on an award that you got in 2015 or something, it's pretty much irrelevant, but people don't really care. And so look at your proof collateral, look at your case studies, look at the testimonials, look at your statistics or your performance information, or like all of those things need to be within the last 5 years, or if not newer, for them to really pack a persuasive punch. So it's an easy test to do. The next test of your stuff, I'm calling it, it's the idea of readability. So is it as simple and easy to read? Is it well structured and laid out? Now, there are a number of ways that you can do that. If you're using Microsoft Office products, and most people are, you can jump into Word and actually go into the analytics part of it and actually do, and it has in there readability indices, how average length of sentences, and it actually works on the same sort of underpinning logic as some of the other apps that you can get, like Grammarly, that will actually do that as well. So you don't have to spend any money to do that. You can actually just go and do it right now. The average sentence length should be, 12 to 15 words or thereabouts, maybe no more than 18. So there's plenty of ways that you can just jump in and audit your stuff right now to see whether it's actually hard to read or not. Whether it's I'm going to share with you an example of relevance in a minute, which I think you'll find is interesting as well. The idea of reaction, and it's not look and feel as such, but there is absolutely contemporization necessary in terms of how our products look. So if you're using a Word template that was created 5 years ago, and if you're faithfully recycling the same thing day in and day out now, it's almost certainly time for it to be refreshed in terms of better and more contemporary styles being applied, the actual structures that you use, the way that you're using graphics now, including them into the document formatting. It's actually interesting, and perhaps you don't get a chance to do it, but we see across a bunch of different organisations how organisations are moving in terms of making the impactfulness of what they're producing. We're seeing, again, noting what I mentioned earlier, that our environment's changing, and so the way procurement is procuring is changing. Have a little think about this. So what if you weren't allowed to upload an actual document anymore? So every single one of your tenders from now onwards was character and word limited uploads into a portal. So would you have a different way of thinking about impact in that sort of environment than a traditional attach a document to an email or attach a document into an uploaded environment? The answer is of course. So we've got to understand that as our world is moving, how we actually drive that reaction in a positive way is also altering. The last one, the point of relevance of what we're writing, is also interesting. So let me just pop up a favourite sort of leading light in our industry. A fellow called Tom Sant talks about types of things to avoid in proposals, and we love it because it's you see it all the time. The idea of fluff, guff, geek, and weasel, these sorts of words that appear, and you can go and audit right now. And I hope sincerely that you don't have tons of bests in breeds or best practices leveraging all these sort of exceptionally useless words. Geek, the guff, all of those sort of fluffy, unnecessary adjectives, and certainly in Sant's world, the idea of weasel, these sorts of slimy / slippery words that don't actually imply a commitment; they just imply a potential to maybe commit. And so if you can, so the point is, you could do this right now if you could ever carve out 5 or 10 minutes to an hour or so maybe to have a look, to test whether what your sort of base collateral that you're using for bids actually, how it's actually performing, especially knowing the environment that we're moving into. I'm happy if you've got any observations or points to check in on a chat along the way. That's fine. I'm happy to stop and answer a question too if you've got something urgent to say, but otherwise I'll just keep us moving. It's only another sort of 85 slides to go. The next idea of bid strategy development, so the second of the three things that you can do, I just want to reflect. Most businesses do a version of this and go, I haven't met anybody that maybe I've met 1 or 2 people. So why are you going to win this tender? They have absolutely no idea, right? And blind dumb luck isn't a great answer. So most people entering into tenders with a view to why it is that they're going to win. What we find a lot of the time, though, is that it's not a well thought through reason. It's a generic reason. It might be based around your broad proposition as an organisation, the broad statements of value that you might have in your brochures or on your website. What it always has is a lack of customer or client centricity. So when we do these sorts of reviews, it it's really obvious that when someone's bidding an opportunity and they really don't understand their client. And so this idea of developing strategy beforehand is essential to work winning. And depending on how early you do it, it might not be a strategy to win a tender. It might be a strategy to position to win a tender. So that's what we'd call capture. So do you have an understanding of the needs and issues and outcomes of that customer? Do you? And if you don't, how can you find out? Acknowledging the probity issues that we've talked about earlier, sure. But a lot of businesses have got a lot of desktop ability to get into that, even if you don't go and specifically talk to your prospect. This idea of competitors is also something that we see almost always absent. This idea of forming points of difference to known competitors or likely competitors. And I think one of the issues why organisations don't like doing it is it feels a bit grubby. In fact, I talked to some ex-procurement colleagues not too long ago about this, and the reality is they don't want to read your tender which says pick us because everybody else is, everyone else is rubbish, right? So they don't particularly want you to spend a lot of time talking down your competitors and talking yourself up. So it's not that, but they know that there are distinct advantages and disadvantages sometimes in the competitive marketplace, and it is a missed opportunity to not reflect that in the way we go about work winning. It's particularly important in the idea of the incumbency, and I'm going to come back to that one in a slide or two. The last one is around us, the idea of capability. We're generally pretty excellent at knowing what we want to say and why we think we're good and all the rest of it, but is it really tuned up to the opportunity? Is it really clear? And more importantly then, and it's this bridge between what we say we're going to do and the benefits of it that often disappears in the rush to get the next tender out the door. And it's really easy way just to fix that by saying we do it this way, and I go, well, why is that good? Oh, because okay, there's your benefit. And at least if you think about that up front, we stand a fighting chance of including it. So this has to happen before every single RFT is responded to. Now, whether you do it in an hour little get together or whether it's done in a facilitated, multi-stage, which it all depends on how big the opportunity is and how far away it is, but it has to be done. The systemic, good performing bidding organisations know this and practice this. The next slide around, I'm calling it the idea of stakeholder alignment. So the third of three things that I wanted to share with you was this idea that those in your organisation not necessarily seeing the world the same way that you do in terms of being prepared for and executing well your work winning. And it's often the case, and I use the term flippantly, the colouring in department, but the reality is that a lot of bidding people are perceived to be the crew that kind of shinies up stuff, and this sort of very poor understanding of what it is that we're trying to achieve. So here's some numbers that you might reflect back to your organisations about what's going on in this space to get some alignment. So 0.5 to 2.5 is an accepted investment ratio, we call it, for work winning. Thanks, Brett. I saw your note about incumbency. I'm going to talk about that in just a second. So 0.5 to 2.5%, we call it the investment ratio. So what that means is generally speaking, to win an opportunity, you expect to invest about 0.5 to 2.5% of the top line value, not the profit, the top line of the opportunity to win it. Okay, so it's a range because it depends on a number of factors, the scale of the opportunity. Some organisations use those numbers to work out across a program of activity or a budget. So rather than look at it at an opportunity at a time, look at our work winning targeting. We want to win, $2 million this year. Okay, and you can work it backwards from there to get some sense of what we really should be investing. And that's a mix then of capture and business development and proposal time. So it allows for all of that upfront stuff as well as the bidding part. Useful calibration, because if you're trying to chase a $10 million deal and you're trying to spend 4 or 5 hours on a couple of hours of estimating and a couple of hours making it shiny, you really are misunderstanding what your good performing competitors are going to be doing. And so take that as some numbers to build some conversations around. The next set of numbers is also a bit related to that, and this is the range 25 to 75 is the range of, and this is sort of our industry calls it boilerplate, but I'm going to say reuse material. So the idea that for any given opportunity, depending on whether it's a new opportunity for you or whether it's a similar opportunity, you might have somewhere between 25 and 75% of the basic tender content already produced in some form. So the good news is, as you know, is that you're generally not starting these things from scratch, and that's why that first point around well, is your stuff actually up to date? You might have 50% of the core content there, but if it's not actually very good or it's not very recent, then it's not that helpful. And so if you understand this sort of idea, and you do because you're here and we're talking to internal stakeholders about it, that has a very, very obvious impact then back this way over to the investment ratio. So if you're trying to enter a new market, an adjacent market, it's a bit different to what you normally do. You expect that you're going to invest more to try to win it. It's just maths. And but it gives calibration, this idea of alignment. Now, the third point, and there's some comments in the chat about this is your incumbency number. So this is the incumbency win rate. So incumbent win rate. So basically, it says that if there is an incumbent, so some organisation that's providing services at the moment, if it's a recompete, or there's an organisation that's influencing a prospect ahead of you and they're liked, right? So it's not if they're not liked, they tend to win most of the time. So 66 to 70% is our number. I don't think there's too many people that would disagree that they're in the box seat. And the reason why is that they're already established all the rapport and the trust. They've already established all of those sort of fundamental sort of human-based drivers that I shared earlier. So it's a bit like, oh, well, if there's an incumbent in there, do I just pack up and go home? The answer is, well, no, but you actually recognise what's going on, and we focus our strategies around that. And you know how you'd argue it, right? If they've been an incumbent for a while, what are you all going to say? Well, maybe they're a bit out of touch. Maybe there's freshness and newness and vigor that the client might need. But what we find, and I do present to procurement organisations about this, is that incumbent, what we call it incumbentitis, the way a lot of procurements are set up is it almost preordains this outcome because of the way the questions are asked and the timeframes that are allowed and all the rest of it. So it's essential positioning activity to understand whether there's an incumbent or there isn't. And if you're the incumbent, good on you, and you're doing a good job, terrific. How are you going to hang on to that? If you're challenging in an incumbent environment, how are you going to do it? And it's not BAU, the same sort of tender saying the same sort of stuff if you're an incumbent or you're not an incumbent. They are actually exceptionally different pitches. And so if you need to get people all on board, these are the sorts of things that you should be sharing with them, because this is actually what really makes a difference. So that, Brett, your question about hopefully around incumbency is answered for that, but I'm happy to touch back on it again. We'll have a couple of minutes, maybe left at the end. So look, and because of all of that, we've introduced a fixed price product called Kickstarter. So just quickly, so those three things I've talked about today, we've got a version of how to do all of that. The getting that sort of calibration, getting that clarity and then getting that idea of convergence of stakeholder alignment through a staged approach up front. So we've got a notional price there that you can see for how much value we subscribe to this activity. So it is a product for deals that you really need to win. So this is organized. This is the bigger deals that you need to spend time and effort on to get them right, to drive up your likelihood of winning. So we've recognised that we've done this for years. We thought, let's just turn it into some very, very straightforward products with very, very clear deliverables. We've got some collateral on it that I won't be sharing today, but just so that there's a way to actually do that stuff, to be feeling confident and comfortable running into those opportunities, especially in the market that we're seeing, where there might be fewer and our reliance on them might be greater than they perhaps have been. Got a couple of testimonials here that they're a bit wordy, and I'm sorry, I didn't want to cut them down too much because they lose their impact. But we've got people that we are happy and they are happy to reference us if you want them to talk about this Kickstarter and how it works and the value that comes out of it. So we know it works. We've been doing this stuff for almost 15 years now, and those organisations that get onto the art of preparing for and wisely investing upstream also win more, but they also find that the investment is less in the open period because we're not scrambling and we're not reworking, we're not doing all of those inefficient behaviours. The last point, so I'm pretty much at the end, is let's reflect back on what we're trying to achieve. So, okay, I've shared some ideas with you about how you can kind of get ready, but what are we actually trying to do when we say we're getting ready? And the answer is we're trying to become the most trusted provider. Our mission in these processes is to build trust. That's why incumbents win most of the time, is because they've already established it. And it's the fundamental motivator of people choosing people, is I'll pick an organisation or person who I trust. It's wonderfully subjective, even if you sort of bash back all the layers of objectivity in a way that procurement evaluates. I won't admit it to you, but the reality is it's people making decisions about people. And so to be trusted, you really have to be empathic. So your client needs to have a good understanding that you get them. Your offer needs to make sense, so it has to be logical, and you have to be believable. Right? They see the real you. This concept of authenticity, and if you focus on your recency of your proof stuff, then you're driving up authenticity in your capture planning work or your bid strategy work. If you're focusing on your approach and your logic, you're focusing on that, your customer and intimacy and understanding, you catch that. So you get all these things by doing the work up front. And I haven't met too many people who disagree with me that at the end of the day, this is what's actually driving success and decision making. So to have a think about that, the trust triangle we've borrowed from a couple of Harvard Business School professors called Fry and Morris. You can see the reference there. They did a really cool TED talk a couple of years ago, so you might want to go and look at that too. So thank you so much, everyone. Thanks for your time. Really appreciate it. Go forth and work win. Okay, we all need to win business. We know it's kind of getting tighter. We know there are ways for you to jump in front of your competitors. So appreciate again your time and interest, and maybe we'll have a chat soon.